Thaddius Thorne pulled his horse to a stop on the windswept north ridge, the late afternoon sun casting long, pale shadows across the snow-dusted prairie. Winter had arrived early in the territory, the air biting with a chill that promised a heavy freeze by nightfall. Something moved near the frozen creek bend a quarter-mile distant, a splash of color against the stark white and gray landscape. Thaddius squinted against the glare, his gloved hand rising to shade his eyes. It was a woman, young, perhaps in her mid-20s, struggling with something near the water. He nudged his horse forward 3 steps, then stopped, his brow furrowing. She was wearing a light pink prairie dress, the hem ragged and wet with snow, entirely inadequate for the season. Even from this distance, Thaddius could see the inadequacy of what she was building. It was a shelter, if it could be called that, cobbled together from scavenged wood and driftwood. The boards were warped, split, and barely holding together against the biting wind. Thaddius shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking in the silence. He had ridden this fence line every day for 3 years since Clara died. The land knew his routine, and the cattle knew his silence. Now, this woman had appeared, a stranger with dark hair and delicate features, attempting to build hope from scraps. As he watched, she positioned another board and raised a hammer. The crack echoed across the silent prairie as the wood split under the blow. She stumbled back, slipping on a patch of ice, but caught herself. Her hands went to her face for just a moment before she reached for another board. Thaddius's jaw tightened. He recognized that kind of determination. It was the kind that got people killed on the frontier when the snows came deep and hard. He catalogued the details with a rancher's critical eye. She had placed the shelter near water, which was smart, and she had arranged stones for a fire pit. She was resourceful. But the walls, those pathetic walls of broken lumber, would not hold against the first real blizzard. The temperature was dropping rapidly. The northwest horizon held clouds that were charcoal gray and heavy with snow. 2 days, maybe 3, before the whiteout arrived. A man minded his own business out here, that was the rule. Especially when the business involved a lone woman, particularly a Chinese widow, if her appearance was any indication. Social conventions in the territory were rigid, often cruel. But some rules broke against the weight of conscience. A gust of wind suddenly tested her structure. The board shuddered, held by nothing more than bent nails and desperate hope. Thaddius watched the woman steady one wall with her shoulder while hammering another. She was going to die out here. The thought came clear and certain, like the crack of a rifle. Not today, not tomorrow, but when the blizzard howled and she had nowhere to go, the cold would take her. Clara's voice rose in his memory, soft and insistent. "Thaddius, you've got a good heart under all that leather. Don't let the grief freeze you over." 3 years since he'd heard that voice. 3 years of going through the motions, running a ranch that functioned but didn't thrive. Thaddius watched the woman work until dusk turned the snowy prairie a bruised purple. She finally stopped, exhausted, and huddled near a small fire. The shelter's gaps were visible even from the ridge, spaces where the wind would pour through like water through a sieve. Thaddius turned his horse toward home, but the image followed him, a woman in a thin pink dress building a life with broken boards, the same way he had been doing since Clara passed. Thaddius returned at dawn, compelled by something stronger than curiosity. The woman was already working, her movement stiff from sleeping on the freezing ground. He stayed on the ridge, watching. She had made tea over her fire, the steam rising in the sharp morning air. Her hands shook as she lifted the tin cup. When she set it down and picked up the hammer again, he saw the bandages, strips torn from her petticoat wrapped around raw palms. The sun climbed slowly, warming nothing. She worked steadily, trying to shore up the weakest wall. Each board she added seemed to make the structure less stable rather than more. The geometry was wrong, and the materials were rotted. She was building failure one nail at a time. But she didn't stop. Thaddius felt something shift in his chest, like a door long closed beginning to open. This woman wasn't asking for help, she wasn't begging or weeping. She was simply doing what needed doing with what she had. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping snow into swirls. The woman looked up, fear flashing across her face. She braced against the shelter's corner post as the gust hit. The weakest wall collapsed. Boards clattered down, nails pulling free from wood too rotted to hold them. The woman staggered, caught off balance, and sat hard in the snow. She stayed there, motionless, staring at her hands. Thaddius held his breath, waiting for the tears, for the breakdown. It didn't come. She just looked at her palms with the quiet bewilderment of someone who had given everything and found it wasn't enough. That silence broke through Thaddius's hesitation. It was the terrible recognition that courage alone couldn't make broken boards whole. He turned his horse toward home, but the decision was already made. He had no lumber on him, no tools, just good intentions. But he had those things back at the barn. He rode hard for the ranch, the cold deepening with every mile. The barn smelled of hay and horses. Thaddius stood in the half-light, looking at the stack of seasoned pine boards he'd purchased for years ago. He and Clara had planned to rebuild the porch. Then the fever came, and plans changed into painful memories. He ran his hand along the top board. Smooth, straight, solid. Good lumber, waiting all this time for a purpose. That's good wood you're hauling off, a voice said. Thaddius turned. Amos stood in the barn doorway, 60 years old and steady as an oak. He was the foreman and the friend who had kept the operation running when grief made Thaddius useless. Good wood deserves good purpose, Thaddius said. Amos nodded slowly, a smile creasing his weathered face. About damn time you remembered that. Thaddius loaded the pack horse methodically, boards, nails, a proper hammer, his good saw. He added a canteen of water, strips of clean cloth, and a tin of salve. Each item was chosen with care. The other hands watched from the bunkhouse. Young Toby tipped his hat, and old Matteo smiled. They understood what was happening, even if Thaddius couldn't quite name it himself. You need company? Amos asked as Thaddius swung into the saddle. No, Thaddius said. But I appreciate the offer. She got a name. Don't know yet. But you know she needs help. That's enough, I reckon, Amos chuckled. Clara would have done the same. Do it in a way that would make her proud. Thaddius rode out under the pale winter sun. The lumber rode solid on the pack horse, purpose given shape and weight. Dawn was breaking again by the time he approached the creek bend. Frost covered the grass, turning the world silver. The woman's shelter was pathetic in the growing light. He could see her huddled near the fire, wrapped in a thin blanket that did little against the snow. Lin Wei woke to the sound of hoofbeats, fear spiking through her exhaustion. She scrambled upright, clutching the blanket, her eyes searching for escape routes. A man sat on horseback 20 yards distant, big and weathered, with a pack horse behind him. He made no move toward her, just waited. He said finally, his voice calm. Didn't mean to startle you. Lin's heart hammered. She stayed silent, assessing. The man wore working clothes. His hands rested easy on the saddle horn. Name's Thaddius Thorne. Ranch is 3 miles west. I've been watching you try to build with those broken boards. He paused. Can't build much with rot. Mind if I help? Lin found her voice, accented and soft. Why? Do you want money? I have none. Because that storm is coming, Thaddius said simply, pointing to the darkening sky. And you won't survive it with what you've got. I didn't ask for money. He dismounted slowly and began unpacking the lumber. Good boards, straight and solid. Lin wanted to refuse on principle. She had learned the hard way that help often came with a heavy price, especially for a woman alone, and even more so for one of her heritage. But principle didn't keep you warm when the wind cut through gaps in rotten wood. You have 2 choices, Thaddius said, looking at her directly. Let me help fix this shelter proper, or freeze to death in 3 days. I'd hate to ride out here and find you dead because you were too stubborn to accept good lumber. Lin looked at her throbbing hands, then at the pile of sturdy pine. All right, she said quietly. My name is Lin Wei. Thank you. Thaddius nodded once, then started working. He pulled down what remained of her structure without comment, sorting the usable boards from the worthless. Lin watched for a moment, then joined him. "Tell me what to do," she said. "You know how to handle a hammer." "I learn quickly." "All right then. We start with the foundation." They worked through the morning. Thaddius taught her proper joinery, showing her how to brace corners against the wind. Lin absorbed every word, her hands moving with increasing confidence. The silence between them felt comfortable. By midday, the wall stood square and true. "It is really going to hold," Lin said, touching a corner post. "Good lumber, good placement," Thaddius replied. "That'll outlast both of us." They shared lunch on the partially completed porch, bread and jerky Thaddius had brought. Lin ate slowly, trying not to show her hunger. "Where are you heading, Miss Lin?" Thaddius asked. "I was heading to Copper Creek." "A man there?" "He wrote letters." "He promised a home." She looked at her bandaged hands. "When I arrived, he had no home to give. He had gambled it away. I walked this far before I couldn't walk anymore." Thaddius was quiet. "That's rough luck." "That is life," Lin said, her voice hardening. "I should have known better than to trust promises." "Some men keep their word," Thaddius said. "Others don't. You can't know which until circumstances test them." "And which are you?" "The kind who shows up with lumber." Lin felt something ease in her chest. This man could have ignored her. Instead, he had brought wood and patience. "Storm's coming tomorrow," Thaddius said, standing. "Let's get the roof tight." They worked through the afternoon. By dusk, the shelter was complete, for solid walls, a proper roof, and a door that closed firmly. Lin stood inside, overwhelmed by the simple fact of protection. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Thaddius gathered his tools. "It'll keep you dry and warm." "But Miss Lin, I'm going to speak plain. This shelter solves today. It doesn't solve winter. You have no supplies." Lin's jaw tightened. She knew it was true. "My ranch needs help," Thaddius continued carefully. "Cooking, mending, keeping the house. Pays fair. Bunkhouse has a spare room with a stove. No obligation. Just honest work." Lin looked at him. "Honest work. A room with a stove." It sounded like salvation. "I accept," she said. Thaddius nodded, relief crossing his face. "Get some rest. I'll come by tomorrow morning with a horse." He rode away as darkness fell, and Lin stood in her solid shelter, feeling the walls that would protect her. Someone had cared enough to help. Someone had brought good wood when she only had broken boards. The next morning, Thaddius returned. Lin gathered her few belongings, the pink dress she wore, a shawl, a tin cup, and a blanket, into a canvas sack. The ride to the ranch took an hour. The main house was large but felt empty, a place that functioned without living. "It is not fancy," Thaddius said, showing her the spare room. "It is perfect," Lin replied. The days fell into a rhythm. Lin rose before dawn and cooked for the hands. Amos, Mateo, and Toby were polite but distant at first, waiting to see if she would last. On the third day, she organized the chaotic pantry. When Thaddius came in for supper, he stopped short. "I hope this is all right," Lin said quickly. "It's good," Thaddius interrupted softly. "Real good. Clara. She always wanted to organize that pantry." Lin heard the catch in his voice. She didn't pry. Everyone had losses. They ate supper together that evening, Thaddius, Lin, and the hands. The storm had finally arrived, wind howling outside, but the house was warm. "You don't have to work this hard," Thaddius said later, over coffee. "I am not afraid of work," Lin replied. "You helped me because you saw yourself in those broken boards, didn't you?" Thaddius looked at her, surprised. "Maybe. After Clara died, I stopped caring. The ranch is failing because there's no heart in it anymore. It's just existing. A man who keeps good lumber ready and rides out to help a stranger is not a man without purpose, Lin said gently. That is a man waiting for a reason to remember who he is. Thaddius stared at his cup. Emotions crossed his face: grief, recognition, hope. Maybe you're right. 2 weeks later, supplies were low. Thaddius and Lin rode the wagon into the nearest town, a settlement of grey buildings huddled against the cold. People noticed them immediately, a rancher and a Chinese woman in a pink dress arriving together. Thaddius ignored the stares. I need to visit the bank, he told her. Get what we need at the mercantile. Inside the store, the shopkeeper, Mr. Higgins, watched Lin with sharp, unfriendly eyes. You're the woman staying at the Thorne ranch, Higgins said. We don't see your kind out here often. I work there, Lin said, keeping her voice level. Work, Higgins sneered. I'm sure that's what he calls it. Shameful, with his wife barely cold in the ground. Lin felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to defend herself, but she knew the danger of speaking out. She completed her purchases and left quickly. Outside, she heard women whispering near the church, their eyes full of judgment. Living at his ranch. You know what she is. The words hit like stones. Lin walked to the wagon, her hands shaking. Thaddius emerged from the bank 10 minutes later, his face troubled. They rode out of town in silence. I am leaving, Lin said after 2 miles. Thaddius pulled the horses to a halt. What happened? The talk. The looks. They think I am something I am not. And the banker said something to you, didn't he? Thaddius was silent. I won't cost you your livelihood, Lin said firmly. I will find somewhere else. Where? Thaddius asked, his voice hard. Another town? More broken boards? That isn't your problem. It is if it hurts you. You think I care what Mr. Higgins thinks? Thaddius turned to face her. I care that helping you is the first thing that has made sense in 3 years. You think I'm going to let small-minded people drive away the person who made my ranch a home again? Lin's eyes burned with unshed tears. Mr. Blackwood at the bank made noise about respectability and loans, Thaddius admitted. I told him my employment decisions were my business. If folks want to gossip, that says more about them than us. Thaddius. We figure this out together, he said, the word hanging in the cold air. Not employer and employee. Partners. The storm that night was vicious. Lin lay in her room, listening to the fury outside. She thought about packing and leaving to save him the trouble. Then the bunkhouse door opened. Amos stood there with a lantern. Figured you might be packing, the old foreman said. Boss is in the main house right now, wrestling his conscience. Question is, are you going to let him win that fight alone? This isn't his fight. It's mine. You're wrong, Amos said. 3 years I watched him die inside. You woke him up. Seems to me a woman brave enough to build a shelter with broken boards is brave enough to stand beside a good man. Amos left. Lin unpacked her bag. In the main house, Thaddius sat in Clara's chair. He spoke to the empty room. I think I'm falling for her, Clara. Not like us, not yet. But something is building. Is it okay to care? The fire popped. Underneath the absence, Thaddius felt permission. Life continued. Hearts could hold multiple truths. I'm going to fight for her, he whispered. Dawn came clear and cold. Thaddius knocked on Lin's door. I'm riding back to town. Going to make some things clear. Thought you should know. You don't have to, Lin said. Yes, I do. You showed me real courage. I need that on this ranch. We need that. He extended his hand. Partners. Lin took it. Partners. Thaddius rode to town, walked into the bank, and stood before Mr. Blackwood. My loan comes up for review, Thaddius said. You mentioned respectability. Let me tell you about integrity. Lin Wei works for my ranch. She is capable, honest, and hardworking. She saved herself from freezing with nothing but scraps until I brought lumber. That is the kind of spirit this territory was built on. Blackwood looked at him, then sighed. The town talks, Thaddius. Then the town needs to remember its history. Judging a woman for accepting honest work is cruelty, not standards. You can bet against me, or you can bet on a ranch that is finally running right. Thaddius left the bank and went to the church. He spoke to the reverend, asking for fairness, not approval. He stopped at the mercantile and reminded Mr. Higgins of his own grandmother, who had been an immigrant laundress before she owned the store. He stood in the street, letting his presence be seen. He was not aggressive, just solid. Like good lumber. When he returned to the ranch, Lin was waiting. The look on her face, hope mixed with relief, told him everything. How did it go? She asked. Said what needed saying, Thaddius smiled. Some folks are remembering what matters. And if they don't, I can be stubborn. Spring arrived slowly, the snow retreating to reveal green promises. Lin stood in the garden, planting vegetables. She wore a new dress, practical cotton, bought with her wages. The ranch hummed with life. One evening, Thaddius found Lin at her old shelter site near the creek. It still stood, weathered but strong. Thinking about that day, he asked. Every day, Lin admitted. I tried so hard with those broken boards. It wasn't enough. You did what you could. That takes courage, Thaddius said. But you showed me that good lumber is wasted if you're too afraid to build with it. They watched the sunset. I was thinking, Thaddius said, about making the arrangement permanent. A true partnership. Equal stake. Lin looked at him. Some things you build with lumber, she said softly. Some things you build with trust. Both need a good foundation, Thaddius finished. They walked back to the ranch together, side by side. Amos watched from the barn and smiled. The house glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. They had built something strong from the wreckage of their pasts. It was enough. The story of Thaddius and Lin Wei teaches us that while sheer determination is admirable, we often need the support of others and the right tools, whether physical or emotional, to truly survive the storms of life. It reminds us that love and friendship can be found in the most desperate of circumstances, provided we are willing to look past prejudice and social convention to see the human spirit underneath. Just as a shelter cannot stand on rotten wood, a life cannot be rebuilt on grief and isolation. It requires the lumber of love, forgiveness, and the courage to start anew. Thaddius learned that honoring the past doesn't mean dying with it, and Lin learned that trust, though risky, is the cornerstone of a new home. Ultimately, their partnership proves that when two broken people come together with good intentions and solid commitment, they can build a future stronger than anything they could have achieved alone. What do you think of Thaddius's decision to defy the town for Lin? Would you have had the courage to do the same? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story of resilience and romance in the Wild West, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.